this has been a crazy year, to say the least. I'm curious, how it's impacted you and how, it's impacted your priorities, your approach to life, to work, to your day-to-day and your vision of your future.
Yeah, no, that's an easy question. No, it's interesting. I think like so many things, it's this blessing and this curse, right? I have twin boys who were seniors in high school and graduated in May, and they subsequently left the house. So in the beginning of the year, I was like, I'm really going to try to spend more time at home this spring because it's kind of my last time with them before they leave the nest. And sure enough, in January and February, I had been to DC twice, Australia. I was just bouncing all over New York, Puerto Rico. I'd just been bouncing all over the planet. So I wasn't actually doing what I wanted to do, which was spend time at home with my kids before they left. And so in that sense, the lockdown was kind of like a blessing in disguise. So I got to spend, March, April, May, June, and July with those guys. And so that was great in that respect. From the Surfrider perspective, it was certainly challenging. I mean, we're a community building organization. So, we do social chapter meetings, we do expert speakers, we gather at the beach for beach cleanups, we go to city council meetings for advocacy or state legislative hearings. And so everything we do is with a group of people, and so all of those things stopped. And there was also obviously running a nonprofit charity, or hopefully the funding doesn't also stop. Sure. Because the economy's stopping. And so, it was, we had to do a pretty big reset and like everybody else, try to figure out what this all meant for us. And, but now looking back on it, we did a pretty good job. We haven't been back to our office. We really tried to help advance the science and the best thinking about this, because that's been a problem in the United States, because we didn't have leadership at the top. So we're a science-driven organization, so we tried to help play that role. We did a lot of research on COVID and water quality and whether or not it's going to be impacting water quality and whether you could get it from being in the ocean, which we didn't know in the beginning. We saw beach closures because, interestingly enough, as soon as life shut down, a lot of people sadly lost their jobs. There was a mad rush to the beach. All the other attractions that we'd go to, museums, amusement parks were closed. So then beaches got closed. So we worked with an expert panel of folks from public health to environmental justice to law and coastal management to try to help cities and states open beaches back up, because it turns out if you're doing good practices, they're actually great places to be.
Right.
So a lot of shifting and evolving of the organization. We've done we've gone digital like everybody else. Yeah. City council meetings are now being conducted digitally, and in some ways, instead of having to sit in a hearing room for 5 hours waiting for your 3 minutes, you can do it on your. So some things are in that regard, it's better.
Right.
So and we've done pretty well. One other thing I'll add, and then I'll try to shut up, is there's been an absolute explosion in plastic pollution. COVID has been a disaster. So if you think about it, a lot of we were all freaked out about surfaces and bags in the beginning and any reusables. So all the reusable bag laws were quickly paused. You can't bring your reusable cup into the coffee shop anymore. We all started eating takeout almost exclusively. Mm-hmm. So we're bringing home all that, or taking it to the beach, all that single-use plastic. Mm-hmm. More visitors to the beach than ever before, and PPE, personal protective equipment. So we're finding thousands of masks, gloves, wipes at the beach. So this 6 months has been a huge setback for plastic pollution on our beaches. So we have our work cut out for us. That's starting to turn around. We realize that surfaces are not as contaminating as we thought. Sure. So
I feel like focus has been a challenging thing for everybody during this time, because it's what is the appropriate place to put our focus to A, maintain sanity, and B, make a positive impact, giving like so many fundamental elements of the fabric of American society have been tugged at
Totally.
the past 12 months.
Yeah.
But I think, as the person leading Surfrider, I'd imagine, as always, focus is hard, but focus probably now is, I don't know, maybe easier, maybe harder. I don't know.
Well, I mean, it certainly this spring and summer, it felt like this, things were just coming at us so fast, right? So you had COVID, world disrupting. Then we had obviously like the horrible, tragic incidents with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, which frankly were just a couple amongst thousands. But I think the combination of COVID and people hurting and being in front of their TVs, like that obviously catalyzed this whole social and racial justice reckoning in America, about 399 years overdue. And then you had, we have this incredibly divisive election going on. So there was a period where you're like, okay, this is like every month there's like a new challenge that we have to respond to. And, when you want to run an organization, like you were saying, like you got to stay focused and stay on course. And it felt like the tail was wagging the dog a little bit. But what we did, I think there were sort of two things that we did. We're like, okay, we have a mission. So like, let's look at all of these through the lens of our mission, right? COVID, it's plastic pollution, water quality, that's our job. With the racial and social justice stuff, we, like a lot of other organizations, had to look in the mirror and be like, we're not doing a good enough job here. And we really need to, if we're in the movement building business and we want to get the world's lovers of the ocean engaged in conservation, we shouldn't be limiting ourselves to like rich white people on the coast. We need to expand who that is. And so that was like a good thing for us. But we're like, okay, we looked at it through the mission again. And even with the election, that one's even a little easier. The Trump administration was historically the worst administration for the environment we've ever had. So we've been playing defense for 4 years, and the Biden administration looks to be much better. That said, we're a nonpartisan organization, so we had to be careful. We actually just encouraged people to vote. We didn't tell them who to vote for. But by having that lens always be like, how does this issue look through our mission lens? And what values do we have? And our values are science, community, sort of conservation, and that like everybody should have a say in what's happening, that kind of grassroots organizing motto. So the value and the missions were what we used to be the filters, and that helped a lot.
Yeah.
So, and now I guess like all things, humans kind of adjust. So now it almost feels normal relative to how disorienting it was in the beginning.
Your geography plays a huge role in your experience with this pandemic, and obviously there's like life perspective generally, but I think everyone's experience is really different depending on where you live.
Well, and I think that's another, like the pandemic has exposed a lot of cracks, like you mentioned, in society, right? Like I think the social and racial justice is sort of a function of like the disparity of wealth, and like there's a lot of people in America who are hurting, and the access to open space and to be able to live in places that are not overcrowded. If you're stuck in a small multi-family apartment building in Chicago in March and it's freezing, it's really hard to avoid COVID. And that's why we're seeing, I think, a lot of, death as a result of that. If you live in a coastal town in Southern California where you're outside all the time, like life's kind of easy. And, here we're blessed with, in sort of Orange County, Laguna Beach, tons of open space, tons of beaches. LA, unless you're living on the beach, is pretty park poor. Access to open space has become a really important discussion, and I believe that everybody should have access to open space, whether it's urban park or the outdoors, and we're not there yet as a society. And I mean, if there's a positive that comes out of this, is that there'll be a a bigger emphasis on creating that open space for everyone, which would be great.
I'm curious if you've observed or if you're aware of any science data that reflects like a reduction of emissions over this time period that, you know, maybe has been like breathed a little life into the future of the Earth. If it really is, because living in Los Angeles, you know, in the first few months, I'm like, the Earth has to be breathing a little easier right now. And I don't know if everything's already cranked up to 11 to 12 to make up for lost time. Maybe that may be the case, but I'm certainly curious. And I don't know if you've seen or observed any data.
A little bit, yeah, and it's sort of a funny like tale of two cities. So less flying, right, and a lot less driving. I think at a local level, that's actually having a positive effect, like less smog in Los Angeles Basin. There was a slight drop in sort of greenhouse gas emissions at the front end of COVID. But you know, it's interesting, the 2.5% of the global emissions is airplane flights. So like we could stop all airplane flights forever tomorrow and we'd still have a global warming challenge. So at the end of the day, there are 70 companies that are producing like the vast majority of greenhouse gas emissions in the country. So like this whole idea that our personal behavior is gonna save the day, it's not. We need to actually get those oil and gas companies to stop doing what they're doing. Mm-hmm. So we saw a tiny shift, but that's indicative of how small our individual actions make a difference compared to the power plants and the fracking and all the production and burning that's going on day to day, just to like when you flip your light switch.
Sure. So perhaps in the near term, if there are some policy adjustments, they may benefit, they may make some headway.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the oceans are at the center of climate change. You don't hear as much. They've absorbed 90% of the heat, 30% of the carbon. You know, sea levels are rising, we're seeing storms, and so the oceans also have an incredible capacity to absorb carbon. They call it blue carbon, which is wetlands, mangroves, seagrasses. So there's a great bill actually in Congress right now called the Ocean Climate Solutions Act that we'll be out there advocating for. That's talking about how we can manage and protect our oceans in such a way that they'll ultimately help us, you know, cool the planet.
Thinking about voting.
Yeah.
So we've got our ballots. They're complex. These are sophisticated things that we're asking everybody to do and to participate in democracy. I traded notes of my parents in Virginia. Their ballots are, I mean, everyone's ballots are different regionally too, but like we're voting on how a lot of money gets directed towards a lot of different ideas and policies and people. How challenging and daunting the task of voting for
sort of
policies
responsibly,
are.
right?
And I think the way the information gets presented, even like on ballots, is like the information is presented in diametrically opposing perspectives, really.
Yeah. You know, I think there are good resources out there that help you, you know, break down the choices, because the propositions in California in particular are incredibly complicated. They're worded in such ways that it's hard to know intentionally, like the wording of those things is a game unto itself. No, right? It's yes really hard. No.
So I'm stopping this, or am I?
Exactly. Or is this a double negative and I'm supporting it? They are super complicated. So I think, you know, making that time, doing your homework, reaching out to people who you know, like I know the coast and ocean issues because it's my job. There are other people who know the health or other issues, you know, labor or whatever they are better than I. But there's good research. There's good research out there if you can make the time. But you know, that's what you're talking about is like, hey, this is not just like a flippant. I walk in there and make a couple choices. If you want to be serious about it, you got to invest that time.
It's interesting. I mean, I guess it also maybe reinforces the idea that voting really is a privilege and like something to embrace, but it's something that requires a lot of time to become educated on what you're actually voting for.
Yeah,
it's not a simple thing actually.
It was interesting. We go to DC, it'll be virtual this year, but in 2021. But in February, kind of before everything went down, we bring about 150 people to DC, and we go meet with our representatives, Senate and House, and some of the agencies. And it's been really interesting because I had one of a pro surfer with me, who I'll keep nameless, who he was like, I never voted because I just felt like the system was like corrupt. And so why participate in a system that's broken? So I was kind of a protest non-vote. And he in coming to DC, he was like, wow, now I understand the decisions are being made with or without me. So my protest vote was actually the opposite. I just was giving everyone else permission to run the show without me. Right. And so that was a great wake-up call. And I feel like this election had that same sort of sentiment, which is, if you're not participating in the process, somebody else is taking advantage of the fact that you're not.
Right.
So you really got to get out there and have your interests be heard. And you're right, we're lucky. We live in a democracy. I mean, all the change that we make at Surfrider, whether it's passing a bag ban, stopping offshore drilling, tackling climate change, is all through the democratic process that starts at your city council, your county supervisors, state legislation, up to the federal legislation. And so you can make incredible progress through our system if you're dedicated to participating.
What's the first thing on the list for next year?
The first thing on the list is, trying to figure out what we can do through administrative law to address a lot of the issues. So on December 8th, we're going to be a coalition of groups is going to be releasing a series of a wish list for executive action on plastic pollution. So that's a big focus of ours. So the Biden administration can come in and rejoin the Paris Treaty and then start taking some executive actions to do with plastic pollution, clean water, and climate change. We'll be doing a virtual Hill Day in early March. So we'll be, out with a couple hundred of our activists, meeting with our legislators digitally to try to, encourage some legislative action on the environment, protecting our ocean waves and beaches. So,
awesome.
Yeah, plenty of work to be done.
Yeah, there's plenty to do, that's for sure. Last question. This is kind of a fun one. So it's just the key to happiness, according to Chad Nelsen.
Well, this is great. I have a good friend who I went to college with, who's a doctor in LA, and he just did a seminar on health and wellness for the Surfrider Foundation staff, and he had this formula that I subscribe to, which is diet plus exercise plus sleep plus relationships equals mood. So, and he talked, I love this, I hadn't heard this. He said, LeBron James treats sleep as fundamental to his training regimen as diet and exercise. So he actually actively works on sleep like he lifts weights. Mm-hmm. So for the key to happiness for Chad is a good night of sleep, healthy meals, getting out there and riding my mountain bike or surfing and spending time with my family.